Henry O'Connell had lived in the northern Rockies for as long as he could remember, in a small, weather-beaten cabin nestled deep within the towering pines and endless snowfields. The wind howled relentlessly during the harsh winters, rattling the windows and bending the trees. The summers were short, fleeting moments of warmth, the land of fleeting green before the frost returned. He had grown accustomed to the solitude, years had passed since anyone visited his cabin, and he found peace in the quiet, the rhythmic crackle of his fire, and the ceaseless whisper of the wind through the trees. It was a life lived with the wilderness, untamed and unyielding. On this particular day, Henry was chopping wood near the edge of his land, the sharp bite of the axe against the thick logs echoing in the crisp air. His breath misted before him, his eyes narrowing against the bright afternoon sun that gleamed off the fresh blanket of snow. His every movement was familiar, a steady rhythm that mirrored the pulse of the land itself. But then, a soft rustle from the underbrush caught his ear, a sharp sound that didn't belong. He stopped, gripping the axe handle, scanning the dense thicket with cautious eyes. The rustling grew louder, more frantic, and then, a low growl, sharp and filled with agony. His heart skipped a beat. He had heard that sound before, deep in the woods, far from the reach of human hands. But this wasn't the growl of a bear or a mountain lion. This was something different. The sound sent a chill down his spine. There, among the thicket of snow-laden branches, lay a young lynx, its tawny fur matted with blood. Its back leg twisted unnaturally beneath it, and its eyes, wide with pain, met his gaze with a desperate fierceness. Henry froze. The lynx was wild, a creature of the forest, and a creature that could easily tear a man apart if it felt cornered. Its fear was palpable, the tension in the air thick. For a moment, Henry simply watched, his breath caught in his chest. It was a beautiful creature, its large amber eyes full of confusion and terror. Yet, it was also dangerous, its claws were long and sharp, its muscles coiled beneath its coat. Henry's first instinct was to step back, to retreat into the safety of his cabin and leave the animal to its fate. But something in the lynx's gaze kept him rooted to the spot, an unspoken plea for help. The wilderness had always been a place of untamed beauty and danger, but for the first time, Henry felt the weight of his solitude pressing upon him, the knowledge that something needed to be done. Henry stood there for a long moment, unsure. The lynx was a wild thing, powerful and untamable, its raw strength evident even in its injured state. He knew it could turn on him in an instant. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Could he really help this creature, or would it be better to let nature take its course? The old man had lived his life on these grounds, alone, for many years. He had seen countless animals, deer, wolves, elk, live and die by the rules of the wild. But something in the lynx's eyes stopped him from walking away. It wasn't just fear he saw, it was something deeper. A plea for help. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he took a step closer. He couldn't just leave it. Not like this. Not in pain. But how could he help? The lynx was too large, too wild. His hands trembled slightly as he looked around for something, anything, to help him move the animal. The cabin was isolated, the nearest neighbor miles away. The nearest town was further still, and Henry wasn't sure if a vet would even see such a wild creature. He ran a hand through his weathered face, his breath visible in the cold air. He knew what he had to do. After a few moments, Henry's eyes landed on an old, faded blanket that he used to cover his truck seat in winter. It was worn but sturdy. He grabbed it, and with deliberate movements, he approached the lynx. His heart raced, and his pulse quickened. The lynx's eyes locked onto his, still filled with distrust, but there was no growling now, no snapping teeth. It was just the deep, pained stare of an animal in desperate need. "Easy now, easy," Henry whispered, trying to keep his voice calm. The lynx growled low, a warning that caused Henry to freeze. Its body tensed, its fur standing on end. But it didn't move. Slowly, Henry lowered himself, placing the blanket over the lynx's body. It shifted, its claws scraping at the blanket, but it didn't lash out. He carefully wrapped the fabric around the injured creature, securing it with the rope he found in the corner of his shed. The task was slow, the lynx fighting against the movement, but eventually, Henry managed to tie the creature securely. He stood up, looking at the bundled animal with a deep sense of apprehension. The lynx's growls were muffled by the blanket, but the unease in the air was palpable. With a grunt, Henry carefully lifted the animal into the bed of his old truck. It was heavier than he expected, its body stiff and still, only the faintest shivers betraying its suffering. The truck creaked under the weight, its suspension groaning in protest as Henry closed the tailgate. The drive to town was longer than Henry remembered. The snow crunched beneath the truck's tires, the roads icy and rutted. Every bump sent the lynx shifting, its growls growing more frequent, more desperate. Henry kept glancing nervously at the rearview mirror, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. The animal's eyes glared at him through the small window between the truck bed and the cab, its intense gaze never leaving him. "Just hang in there," Henry muttered to the lynx, though he wasn't sure if it could understand. It was as though the words were for himself as much as the animal. The ride felt endless. The old truck rumbled and shook with every turn, and Henry could feel the lynx's presence in the back like a coiled spring, waiting for any opportunity to snap. A low growl reverberated from the back, a deep, raw sound that sent a shiver through Henry's spine. He glanced back again, his eyes catching the flicker of the lynx's golden gaze through the rear window. There was no anger there now, only pain. "Almost there," Henry murmured, trying to reassure himself. The small town was just up ahead, its lights twinkling in the distance, an oasis of civilization in the endless white wilderness. As the town grew nearer, Henry's thoughts became a whirlwind. What if the vet wouldn't take the lynx? What if it was too wild for treatment? His hands gripped the steering wheel even tighter. He didn't know if he was more afraid of the animal's unpredictable nature or of the thought of failure. He turned onto the snow-lined main road, the streets growing more familiar as he neared the veterinary clinic. It was a modest building on the outskirts of town, its windows glowing softly in the darkening evening. Henry pulled up outside, his truck tires crunching to a stop on the icy ground. With a deep sigh, he got out and approached the back of the truck. The lynx was still quiet now, its breathing shallow. Henry could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he carefully opened the tailgate and began to lift the animal out. It was slow, the lynx stirring slightly as it shifted, but it made no sound. He could feel the weight of its body in his arms, the strength that still lingered beneath its injuries. It wasn't dead yet. There was hope, at least. With great care, he carried the lynx inside the clinic, its weight heavy against his chest. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. The vet, Dr. Lucas Owens, looked up in surprise as the old man walked through the door, the lynx wrapped in the faded blanket, its head peeking out with watchful, wary eyes. Dr. Owens' brow furrowed with concern. "What is that?" "A lynx?" he asked, walking quickly over. "Found it out in the snow. Injured." "I need your help," Henry said, his voice strained but firm. Dr. Owens nodded immediately, his gaze turning soft as he assessed the injured animal. He motioned to the nearby examination table. "Let's get it inside. We'll take care of it." The clinic's door swung open with a soft jingle, and Henry carried the injured lynx inside, its weight heavy and awkward in his arms. He could feel the animal's muscles tensing, the primal energy still rippling beneath its pain. The dim light of the clinic seemed to pause as Dr. Claire Matthews, the young vet who had recently moved to town, turned toward them. Her face held the initial surprise, but her eyes quickly softened as she took in the sight of the injured creature. "Is that a lynx?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. She stepped closer, her gaze flicking to Henry, trying to assess the situation. Henry nodded, his breath shallow. "Found it outside. It's hurt bad. Needs help." Claire hesitated for a moment. She was new to the area, and though she treated domesticated pets and small wildlife before, a lynx was a whole different animal. Still, there was something in Henry's eyes, something desperate but resolute, that compelled her to move forward. "Okay, "We'll take a look," she said, taking charge, though there was a slight tremor in her hands as she prepared the examination table. Henry carefully laid the lynx down, the animal growling weakly but still fiercely aware. The blanket came off, revealing the extent of the damage, a deep gash along the side, and the broken leg, which had likely been fractured during its desperate escape. Claire winced at the sight. As she moved toward the lynx, it suddenly snapped its head up, its golden eyes burning with wild fury. With a low, guttural growl, it lunged toward her, its claws swiping through the air, narrowly missing her arm. Claire stumbled back, a flash of fear in her eyes, but Henry's hands were already on the lynx, holding it down as gently as he could. "Easy, easy," Henry said, his voice low, trying to calm the animal, his grip firm on its back. Claire stood frozen for a moment, before she shook herself out of the shock. "It's too wild, this is going to be difficult," she said, already pulling a syringe from the counter. "We need to sedate it." But the lynx was no ordinary wild animal. As Claire approached with the sedative, the animal tensed further, its muscles rippling beneath its fur. It snarled, baring its teeth, and Henry had to brace it against him, holding the lynx as steady as possible, but the creature was stronger than he expected. It twisted beneath his hands, its sharp claws grazing his arm, but he didn't flinch. The lynx needed help, and it was his responsibility now. Claire tried again, aiming the needle at the lynx's flank. This time, she managed to get a small dose in, but it was clear that the animal was resisting the sedation, its eyes glinting with an untamed, savage strength. "It's going to be tough," Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's strong, too strong for me alone." Henry met her gaze, his expression hardening. "We do everything we can," he said, his voice firm. "We can't give up on it now." Claire paused, the weight of the moment settling over her. She looked back at the lynx, whose wild, wounded eyes seemed to pierce straight through her. "Okay. We'll try again," she said, resolve building in her chest, even as she knew it might be too late. She had no idea if the lynx would make it, but Henry was determined. There was something in his eyes, a quiet, unspoken bond between man and beast, that told her they weren't giving up without a fight. The weeks passed slowly, each day blurring together in a routine that Henry had never imagined. The lynx, though still fragile, began to show signs of recovery. The deep gash on its side slowly healed, and the broken leg, now carefully splinted, started to regain some strength. But it wasn't just the physical healing that Henry noticed. The animal's behavior was changing too. At first, the lynx had been nothing but a storm of aggression and fear. But now, it would lie quietly in its makeshift inn, watching Henry with a curious calm as he fed it or cleaned its wounds. Occasionally, when he approached, the lynx would let out a soft purr, the first sound of contentment he'd heard from it. It wasn't much, but it was a sign this creature, wild by nature, was starting to trust him. Yet, as the lynx's health improved, so did the weight in Henry's heart. The once quiet home now pulsed with the lynx's presence, its growls, its movements, even the quiet moments of stillness between them. Henry had always been a solitary man, his life defined by solitude, but now, with the lynx in his care, he faced the undeniable truth: he wasn't as alone as he'd once thought, but this bond was complicated. It tugged at him, offering both comfort and unease. He couldn't deny the connection forming between them, yet a part of him feared it. What would happen when the lynx was strong enough to leave? Could he bear to let it go? As the day drew closer for the lynx to be released, Henry found himself standing at the edge of his property, staring into the vast wilderness beyond. The lynx had healed, its coat now thick and glossy, its legs strong once more. It paced restlessly inside the pen Henry had built, its eyes frequently meeting his, as though silently asking, "What will you do?" The moment of release had arrived. The wildlife specialist was already on his way, ready to transport the lynx back to the wild, to a protected reserve where it could roam free. But as Henry unlocked the pen, the lynx didn't run. It didn't flee to the wild. Instead, it remained where it was, watching him. A flicker of understanding passed between them, and Henry's heart tightened. He knew in that moment, the lynx had imprinted on him. It had come to see him as its protector, its companion. With a sigh, Henry closed the pen gate. The decision was made, though it pained him to admit it. The lynx could never go back to the wild. It needed him now, and in its eyes, Henry saw a deep, unspoken plea. There was no turning back. He knelt beside the lynx, resting his hand gently on its head. "Looks like we're in this together," he murmured. The lynx pressed its head against his chest, a soft rumble of contentment vibrating through its body. In the silence that followed, Henry realized that the choice had never really been his to make.